There was a cross burned into the dog food. That's when I called the priest. I know how it sounds. If I were hearing it from someone else, I'd probably laugh too. But I'm not someone else. I'm Greg Wilkins, and this happened in my own kitchen, in my own house, to my own dog. And laughing was the last thing on my mind when I saw what I saw that morning. My Labrador, Boomer, had never skipped a meal. Not once. He was 10 years old and had the appetite of a teenager after football practice. The kind of dog who would stare a hole through you if you were even a second late filling his bowl. So when I came downstairs that Tuesday morning and found him lying next to his food, eyes locked on the bowl but not eating, I knew something was wrong. At first I figured it was just a stomach bug, or maybe he got into the trash and ate something that didn't sit right. But then I crouched down beside him, gave his ears a scratch, and looked into the bowl. There, clear as day, was a perfect cross burned into the kibble. Not just a shape someone could argue looked like a cross. It was a cross. Singed around the edges, the kibble blackened and curled in a way that could never happen naturally. And the smell, it was a strange mix of smoke and something else I still can't describe. I backed away, slowly. Boomer stayed put, his nose just inches from the bowl. He didn't whimper or growl. He just stared at it, as if waiting for it to change or disappear. I reached for my phone and called my friend, Dennis, who works at the local church. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I genuinely didn't know what else to do. "You want me to come over because of your dog's breakfast?" he asked, half laughing. "Just come. Bring Father Joe. Please." They were at my house within 20 minutes. Dennis still looked like he thought it was some elaborate joke, but Father Joe was different. He was quiet as he walked into the kitchen. He didn't laugh when he saw the bowl. In fact, he didn't say anything for a long while. He just stared, then looked at Boomer, then at me. "Has he eaten anything since?" "Not a bite, not a drop of water either." Father Joe reached into his coat and pulled out a small bottle of holy water. Without saying a word, he flicked some over the bowl. Boomer didn't react, but the smell in the room changed again. Less like smoke, more like something sweet. The cross in the kibble slowly darkened further until it almost looked like a shadow that had always been there. "This is unusual," Father Joe said finally. "And I don't use that word lightly." We didn't come to any conclusions that day. The priest blessed the room, the bowl, and Boomer himself. He didn't declare anything evil or possessed. He just said, "Watch him closely, and call me if anything else happens." That night, I couldn't sleep. Boomer still hadn't eaten. He followed me from room to room, never more than a few steps behind, like he was protecting me, or maybe the other way around. I left the bowl in the sink and laid a fresh one down with new food. He sniffed it, turned around, and lay back down with his chin on his paws. The next morning, the cross was back. I hadn't put anything in the bowl yet. It was just sitting there, empty, and there was that same blackened cross on the bottom. I called Dennis again, who this time didn't laugh. He came over without the priest, but with a camera and gloves. We didn't touch the bowl. We just took pictures. I sent one to my sister in Montana. She replied with 3 words: "Get out now." But I couldn't leave Boomer. Over the next few days, the bowl kept changing. Some mornings the cross would be there. Other times it would be a star, or a circle with lines through it, or what looked like a handprint. Boomer still wouldn't eat from it. He just watched. But here's the strange part. He wasn't losing weight. Not even a little. He had the same energy, same shiny coat. It didn't make sense. I started keeping a journal. Every symbol, every smell, every change. Dennis was practically living at my place by then, trying to help me make sense of it. We Googled ancient symbols. We called a theology professor from a nearby college. We even brought in a guy who worked in paranormal investigations. Each had a different theory. None of them gave me any peace. Then, a week after it started, Boomer barked at the bowl. Just once, a single loud bark that echoed through the kitchen like thunder, and the bowl cracked, right down the middle. Just a thin hairline crack, but it was the first real reaction we'd seen from him. I replaced the bowl, stainless steel this time, no symbols. Boomer sniffed it. Then he ate, like nothing had ever happened. That was the first day I cried about it. I'd held it together until then, trying to be logical, trying to be strong. But when he licked the bowl clean and looked up at me with those big brown eyes, tail wagging, I just dropped to my knees and wrapped my arms around him. But of course, it didn't stop there. The next day, the symbols appeared on the floor. Under the table, just barely visible, like someone had burned them into the hardwood. Same cross. Same smell, Boomer didn't bark this time. He just stood there, head tilted, looking at the spot as if waiting for something. That's when I realized. Maybe it wasn't about him at all. Maybe it was about me. Boomer had been trying to get me to see something. Or feel something. He was the most loyal dog I'd ever known, and he wasn't afraid. So maybe I shouldn't be either. Dennis and I spent the whole afternoon scrubbing the floor. The mark didn't fade, not completely. But that night, Boomer slept peacefully. No pacing, no barking, just deep, steady breathing at the foot of my bed. I didn't sleep. I watched him, waiting for the next sign. Because whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not even close. The morning after the symbol appeared on the floor, I woke up to the sound of Boomer whining softly by the front door. It wasn't his usual excited bark he gave when he wanted a walk. It was quieter, like a murmur, almost mournful. I rolled out of bed, rubbed the sleep from my eyes, and shuffled over to him. His nose was pressed to the bottom corner of the doorframe, and he kept glancing back at me. All right, I mumbled. You want out early? Let's go. But when I opened the door, he didn't bolt out like he usually did. Instead, he stepped outside slowly, sniffing the porch, then the railing, then the first step. Something had his full attention. I followed him barefoot onto the dew-covered grass. The sun was still tucked behind the hills, casting everything in blue and gray shadows. Boomer padded around the side of the house and stopped at the garden bed. It was a mess. I hadn't planted anything this season, and weeds had taken over. But Boomer stood still, staring at the dirt like he saw something I couldn't. What is it, buddy? He looked at me, then down at the ground, then back at me again. I sighed, crouched down, and started pulling away the top layer of dead leaves and debris. A few minutes in, I noticed something odd in the soil. Smooth, pale, almost chalky. I brushed more dirt away until a small wooden disc came loose in my hand. About the size of a silver dollar. It looked hand-carved, with another symbol in the center. Different this time. It resembled an eye inside a triangle. Dennis had arrived not long after I called. We sat on the porch, staring at the disc on the table between us. It's like your place is trying to send us mail, Dennis muttered, his coffee cup trembling slightly. Boomer laid beside us, finally calm again. Dennis took a photo of the disc and sent it to the theology professor we'd spoken with last week. The man called back within the hour. "That's a common motif in early Christian mysticism," he explained over speakerphone. "The eye represents divine watchfulness. The triangle is the Holy Trinity. But there are also roots of this symbol in far older traditions: Egyptian, Masonic, even Sumerian." "So what do we do with it?" I asked. "Don't destroy it. Keep it safe. It could be a message or a marker. It's hard to say without context. But if these things keep appearing, the source may not be malicious. It may be trying to guide you." "Guide me? Toward what?" That was the question burning in my mind. Later that day, I went through old boxes in the garage, trying to find anything from the previous owners. I'd bought the place 10 years ago from a retired couple who'd moved to Florida. Nothing strange had ever happened, at least not that I'd noticed. But in the far corner of the attic, behind a broken floor lamp and a torn pool float, I found a box marked "To be blessed." It was filled with old photos, yellowed envelopes, brittle newspaper clippings, and a small notebook bound in leather. Inside were pages of notes, sketches of symbols. Some I recognized from the bowl and the garden disc. There were names written next to some of them, and dates. One entry read, "Third visitation, 1982. Bowl refused to hold water. Dog howled at east wall for 3 nights." I sat there in the dust, heart pounding. This wasn't new. This had happened before. That night, Dennis slept over. He insisted. Said it would be safer if I wasn't alone, even if he didn't say what we were supposed to be safe from. Boomer slept between us in the living room, snoring peacefully. For the first time in a while, things felt almost normal. Until 2:14 a.m. I know the time exactly because the living room clock chimed twice right before it happened. A knock. Not on the front door. On the inside of the wall. Dennis sat bolt upright. I was already half awake, feeling like ice water had been poured down my back. Boomer stood, ears perked, growling low. The knock came again. 3 slow, solid thumps. Then silence. We waited. Nothing. Dennis grabbed the flashlight. I followed him as he traced the sound to the wall behind the couch. Nothing unusual, just drywall. But Boomer walked right up to it and sat, waiting. The next morning, we removed the pictures and shelves, checked for loose boards. Behind the drywall was brick, the old foundation of the house from before the remodel, and carved into the brick, faint but unmistakable, was the same triangle eye symbol from the disc. We took photos, documented everything, sent them to the professor again. This time he sounded excited. Or nervous. Maybe both. "You need to think about what this place is, Greg," he said. "Or more importantly, what it was. There's a history there, deeper than you know. It's not evil, not exactly. But it's active. You're part of something that's trying to remember itself. Trying to remember itself." That phrase stuck with me for days. I didn't want to tell too many people, but I needed more help. So I reached out to the local historical society. A woman named Evelyn came by to review the structure. She was in her 60s, sharp as a tack, and had grown up just 2 blocks away. When I showed her the brick, she went pale. My grandfather used to talk about a house on this street, said it was a marker of some sort, a place where animals acted strange, where things appeared and disappeared. My parents never believed him, thought he was just making up stories. Boomer sat beside her, tail flicking, eyes locked on her the whole time she spoke. Evelyn took notes, photographs, and promised to dig into the town archives. That night, I had the first dream. In it, I was standing in the kitchen, but it wasn't mine. The counters were older, the walls covered in floral paper. Boomer wasn't there. Instead, a German shepherd stood by the door, tail stiff, ears alert. And in the center of the room was a woman in a white dress, her back to me. She was whispering something, over and over. I couldn't make it out. When I woke up, my mouth was dry, and Boomer was standing at the foot of the bed, staring at the wall. The same wall where the knock had come. The next morning, I made a decision. I would stop being scared. I would stop reacting like a guest in my own home. This house was mine. Boomer was mine. Whatever was happening, it wanted something. And I was going to find out what. Dennis helped me carefully remove a section of the drywall. Behind it, more brick. And behind that, a small cavity, just big enough for a box. And there it was, wrapped in cloth, tied with string. We pulled it out, hands trembling. Inside were more discs, 9 of them, each with different symbols, and beneath them, a letter. The paper was brittle, but the ink was still clear. To whoever finds this, I am sorry. We tried to end it, but we didn't understand what we were dealing with. The signs appeared for generations, always when a guardian had passed. The dog sees first. The house remembers last. You must not break the chain. Do not fear the marks. They are the house waking up, and the house must never sleep. Dennis sat back, stunned. Boomer nudged the discs gently with his nose, then looked up at me. This wasn't a haunting. It wasn't an attack. It was a ritual, a process. Something ancient that had chosen this place, these animals. And now, me. I didn't sleep that night. I read the notebook again, then the letter. Then I laid the discs out on the kitchen floor, in a circle. Boomer lay in the center, curled up, eyes closed. And for the first time in days, the house felt still, like it was listening and waiting for the next step. 2 days after we found the discs and that letter, something changed in Boomer. Not in a bad way, not like when he was refusing to eat or staring at the wall. It was more like he had a purpose now. Wherever he went in the house, he moved with calm and focus. No more anxious pacing. No more growling at empty corners. It was like he was guiding me through something only he fully understood. I spent that morning organizing the discs. Each one had a different symbol, and I used the notebook we found in the attic to cross-reference every sketch, every annotation. Some symbols had names next to them. Lior, Tessan, Marael. One symbol had no name, just a single note beside it in red ink. Only when the dog accepts. Whatever that meant, I didn't know, but I had a feeling we were getting close to understanding. Dennis had gone back to his place to get some rest. He'd been crashing on my couch for nearly a week, and he said he needed to check in at work before people started thinking he'd vanished off the face of the earth. Evelyn, the historian from the society, had promised to return with a few property maps and land records from the 1800s. It was just Boomer and me again. That afternoon, I walked into the living room to find Boomer sitting perfectly still in the middle of the floor, staring at one of the symbols I'd laid out earlier that morning. It was the one that looked like an open hand, with a spiral in the palm. I watched him for a moment, then slowly knelt beside him. "You know what it means, don't you?" I whispered. He didn't look at me, just kept his gaze locked on the disc. I placed my hand beside the symbol. For a second, nothing happened. Then a strange pressure filled the room. Not heavy, just present, like someone else had joined us. I looked around, my skin prickling. Boomer didn't move. Then the front door creaked open. I jumped to my feet and rushed over, but it wasn't a break-in. Evelyn stood there, clutching a stack of rolled-up papers. She gave me a look that told me she didn't come back just because she felt like it. "Greg," she said, "we need to talk. Now." We sat down at the table and unrolled the maps. One was an old survey of the area from 1863. Another showed property boundaries from 1919. The third was more recent, a zoning map from 1985. Evelyn pointed to the spot where my house sat. "This land," she said, tapping the corner of the 1863 map, "used to belong to a family named Harrow. They ran a sort of sanctuary for sick animals, mostly dogs, some horses, even a couple owls, according to records. People came from all over the region to leave their pets here, hoping they'd be healed." "Like a clinic?" "No, more like a place of spiritual protection. People believed the Harrows could cleanse sickness, not through medicine, but through rituals, prayer, sometimes things that were never written down." "Was it real?" I asked. Evelyn paused. "It was real to them, and something happened that left a mark, because the property changed hands more than a dozen times over the next 100 years, and every owner eventually left, quickly, sometimes within weeks." I sat back. My hands trembled slightly. Boomer was still watching the disc on the floor. "Why stay?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Because he's still here." I gestured toward Boomer. "And he's not afraid." "Not anymore," she gave a slow nod. "There's more. One of the Harrow daughters kept a diary. It's archived downtown. Mentions a companion who helped guide lost spirits. A dog. A protector. She called him the Keeper. I thought it was just a story. Until now. That night, I left the spiral disc in the middle of the living room floor. Boomer curled up beside it, and I watched him for hours. His breathing was steady. Deep. I could feel the whole house humming. Around 3:00 a.m., I woke up with a start. I was still in the armchair. Boomer was sitting upright now, ears twitching. He was staring toward the hallway. I followed his gaze. Nothing was there. Until I looked again. At the end of the hallway stood a figure. Blurry. Faint. Like smoke in human form. It wasn't menacing. It didn't move. Just stood there. Watching. Boomer didn't bark. Didn't growl. He walked slowly toward it, stopping about 5 feet away. He sat, and the figure bowed its head. I didn't speak. I didn't dare. I watched in complete silence as Boomer turned and walked back to me. The figure was gone. The next morning, the disc with the hand symbol was different. The spiral in the center had deepened, like it had been burned a second time, and next to it, on the floor, were 3 small paw prints. Boomer's. Dennis came back later that day. I showed him everything. He listened, wide-eyed, and then asked the same question Evelyn had. "Why haven't you left?" I didn't even have to think about it this time. Because something good is happening. Something ancient. And I think Boomer is part of it. We decided to try something different. We took each disc, one by one, and placed them in different rooms of the house. We waited to see if anything happened. For 3 days, nothing did. Then on the 4th morning, I found the disc with the eye and triangle symbol had moved. It was back in the kitchen, sitting in Boomer's water bowl. I lifted it out carefully. The underside was wet but clean, and beneath it, the water glowed faintly, just for a second, like light refracting through glass. I called Father Joe. He arrived that afternoon, this time with a small team of parish volunteers. I thought they'd panic, or ask to bless the house again, But he didn't. He sat with me at the table, examined the discs, then looked me in the eye. "Whatever this is," he said slowly, "it doesn't feel evil. But it does feel old. It's not our tradition, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. You've been chosen, Greg. Or maybe your dog has. Either way, this place needs guardianship." Guardianship. The word echoed through me. It didn't feel like a burden. It felt right. That night, I had another dream. This time, the woman in the white dress turned around. Her face was kind, weathered, eyes full of tears. She didn't speak. She placed her hand on the dog beside her. Not Boomer, a shaggy sheepdog. And she smiled. When I woke up, there was a disc on my nightstand. I hadn't put it there. It was new, thicker than the others. Carved into it was a symbol I hadn't seen before. 2 dogs standing back to back, tails entwined. I checked the notebook. Nothing matched. I searched online. No results. It was as if the disc had been made that night. Boomer sniffed it once and walked away. Evelyn called the next day. She'd found another box of Harrow family papers. One entry stood out. "When the guardian dog returns and the house awakens again, the new keeper must be named. The bond must be made visible. 2 signs, 1 carved, 1 living." It didn't make total sense, but it didn't have to, because that same day, Boomer barked twice, short, sharp barks, and walked into the hallway. I followed. He led me to the laundry room. He sat. Behind the washing machine was a small, circular hole in the wall I'd never noticed. Inside it, a cloth pouch, tied tight. I opened it slowly. Inside was a dog collar. Old leather, cracked but preserved. The nameplate read, "Keeper." Boomer walked right up to me and sat still as stone. I fastened the collar around his neck, and for the first time since this began, I felt the house breathe. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. I heard it. The walls groaned gently, the floorboards shifted, and the lights flickered. Not out of fear, but like someone waking up after a deep sleep. Boomer stood tall, chest out, head high. He looked like a guardian. Like something had finally clicked into place. And that's when the wind started. Inside the house. Soft at first. Barely there. But it grew stronger. And with it, the sound of whispers. Not loud, not angry, just waiting to be heard. I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Not the scampering of Boomer's paws across the floor, but actual footsteps. Slow, steady, deliberate. I lay there in bed, my body frozen, eyes wide open in the dark. The clock read 3:19 a.m. That number meant nothing to me, at least not yet. Boomer wasn't beside me. I sat up, ears straining. The footsteps weren't getting closer. They were circling the living room below. A slow rhythm, almost ritualistic. I forced myself out of bed and crept toward the landing. The hallway was cold, colder than it should have been for spring. I could see my breath. I didn't want to call out, didn't want to break the moment or draw attention to myself if there really was someone, or something, down there. So I stepped carefully down the stairs, one at a time, clutching the rail. When I reached the bottom, I could finally see what was making the sound. It was Boomer. But not like I'd ever seen him before. He was pacing in a perfect circle around the 7 discs we'd arranged earlier. His head was low, tail straight out, eyes fixed forward. Each step was exact. Measured. Like he wasn't walking but performing something. The whispering I'd heard before was louder now. Not words exactly, but layers of sound. some high, some low, like a chorus breathing in unison. I felt it vibrate in my chest. Boomer stopped and stood at the center of the circle. Then the room changed. It didn't shift visually, but something moved in the air. A charge, like right before a thunderstorm. The candles we'd lit earlier flickered and grew brighter. The discs began to glow faintly, their carvings pulsing like heartbeats. I stepped forward, unsure whether I should intervene or just watch. Boomer looked up at me. Not frightened, but focused. Then his eyes flicked toward the fireplace. That's when I saw it. Above the mantel, the wall had changed. A new symbol had appeared, carved directly into the paint and plaster. It was a simple shape, 3 interlocking circles, like a Venn diagram. Inside the center circle was a paw print. I approached it slowly. There was no sign of a tool having made the mark. No chips or cracks. It looked like it had always been there, hidden beneath the paint until now. Boomer barked once, short, sharp. Then the glow stopped. The room fell silent. He sat down, panting gently, like he'd just completed something exhausting but necessary. The next morning, Dennis returned. He didn't even wait for coffee. "Tell me everything." I walked him through the events of the night. He listened intently, then inspected the symbol over the mantel. Evelyn came by shortly after, drawn by some instinct of her own, or maybe just her obsession with following this strange thread to the end. She studied the interlocking circles for a long time, then flipped through the Harrow family documents she had tucked in her bag. "I think I've seen this before," she said slowly. "There was a mention of a triune mark in a letter from 1911. It was only drawn once in the margins. No one knew what it meant." 3 circles, 1 paw," Dennis murmured. 3 roles? Guardian, guide, and witness, I said. I didn't know where the word had come from. It just slipped out, like I wasn't the one speaking it. We all fell silent. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside for some air. Boomer followed, sitting beside me on the porch swing. The breeze was light, carrying the scent of rain and cut grass. The world felt quiet, like it was holding its breath. I looked out over the backyard. There was something different about it. A tree that had always leaned slightly now stood perfectly straight. A bird bath that had been cracked for years was somehow whole. It was like the house and the land were healing. Boomer rested his head on my knee. "You really are the keeper," I said quietly. That night, I rearranged the discs again. This time I placed them in the pattern of the triune symbol. 3 groups. 3 circles. Boomer watched me, then stepped into the center. He lay down, eyes open. The wind came again, softer now. Not unsettling, just present. The whispering returned, but it was different. Clearer. It sounded like names. I grabbed the notebook and began writing them down as fast as I could. Avael, Brinan, Osith, Mareth. Names I'd never heard, but which felt familiar. I kept writing until the voices faded. When I looked up, Boomer was asleep, tail thumping gently against the wood floor. The next morning, Evelyn returned with an old journal she'd borrowed from the archives. It wasn't part of the Harrow collection. This one belonged to a man named Walter Reeves, a farmer who lived on the adjacent property in 1907. One passage stood out. They say the Harrow dog spoke with angels, that it knew the dead by name, that when it lay still, the wind would speak. I never believed them, not until I saw the ground glow with my own eyes. She looked at me with quiet understanding. "You're not the first, but you might be the last." What does that mean? It means this may be a closing, not a beginning. Maybe the cycle's been waiting for a final piece, and maybe Boomer is it. I didn't know what to do with that idea. It hung in my head for days. And then came the knock. But this time it wasn't from the wall, it was from the front door. I opened it to find a boy standing there, maybe 10 years old. Freckles, straw-colored hair, alone. "Hi," he said, not afraid. "Is this where the keeper lives?" I blinked. "Where did you hear that?" He held up a disc, one of mine, one I'd never given away. "I found it in the woods, by the old creek. It said, 'Come here.'" Boomer came up behind me and sat. The boy knelt and placed the disc before him. Boomer sniffed it, then nudged it gently with his nose. The boy smiled. "I think I'm supposed to help." I let him in. We sat at the table, and I offered him lemonade. He told me his name was Caleb, and that he'd dreamed of a dog with a glowing collar, that the dog had whispered a name to him. "Was it mine?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, it was his." He pointed at Boomer. "What name?" I asked. "Thyan," he said. He said his name was Thyan, and that he remembered now. I looked at Boomer. His ears perked. He stood and walked over to Caleb, resting his chin on the boy's knee. That evening, the wind was stronger, the whispers louder, and for the first time I felt like the house was no longer just waking up. It was speaking. And we were finally starting to listen. The day after Caleb arrived, everything in the house felt sharper. Not louder or busier, just clearer. The kind of stillness you only get after a heavy snow, where every sound feels more precise and every movement has meaning. Even the air tasted different, like metal and rain. Caleb stayed in the guest room, and Boomer, or Thyan as the boy now called him, slept curled up outside his door. That first morning, I found them both in the kitchen. Caleb was humming softly while spreading jam on toast, and Thyan sat with his eyes closed, completely at peace. "I didn't hear him get up," I said, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "He was already waiting for me," Caleb said simply. Over breakfast, Caleb told me more about his dream. He said the dog had shown him places. A forest wrapped in fog, a cliffside lined with stones carved with paw prints, and a hill with a ring of fire around it that never burned anything. Thyan had spoken to him not in words, but in feelings. Calm, urgency, safety, hope, and a name that wasn't his own. "Elden," Caleb said. "That's what the dream kept saying. Elden is waiting." I didn't know any Elden, neither did Evelyn or Dennis, who arrived later that day. But when we said the name out loud, Thyan stood up, walked to the corner of the room, and pawed at a floorboard, the same one I'd thought about prying up weeks ago, but hadn't touched. With a crowbar and some effort, we lifted the board. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of papers, mostly letters and a ledger. The top page was a faded envelope, addressed to Elden Harrow. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The writing was elegant, looping. It read, "You were right, brother. The bond will not break. The dog will remember. The house will remember. And the name will return to light. Forgive me for my doubts. Jonathan." Dennis exhaled slowly. So Elden lived here. A Harrow. Maybe the last one before the line broke. "And Jonathan?" I asked. "Another brother? A friend? Someone who left before it all came back around?" Evelyn leaned in, scanning the letter again. "This handwriting matches a signature I saw on an old adoption form. The last Harrow dog. The record said the dog vanished. No burial. Just gone. I looked at Thian. He looked back. That afternoon, Caleb and I walked the property. He led, moving like he'd been here 1,000 times. We passed the garden bed where I'd first found the disc, then circled around to the woods behind the fence. I hadn't ventured in since the strange events began. Something about them had always made me hesitate. Not Caleb. He walked right through the gap in the fence and into the trees. The air shifted the moment I stepped past the tree line. It was cooler, quieter. The canopy was thick, letting in thin shafts of light. Birds watched us from branches but didn't sing. Everything was holding its breath. About 50 yards in, we reached a clearing. At the center was a stone well, dry and crumbling, covered in moss. Thian circled it once, then lay down beside it. "This is where it ends," Caleb said, staring at the well. "Ends? Not like that. I mean, this is the last piece. This is what the house was waiting for." I walked to the well and peered inside. It was shallow, no more than 8 feet deep, and empty, save for a small wooden box resting at the bottom. Dennis arrived shortly after, breathless from the walk. "You couldn't wait for me?" "I didn't know we were coming here until we got here," I replied. We tied a rope around a nearby tree and lowered ourselves in, one at a time. The box was heavier than expected. Inside were fragments of carved stone, a rusted collar tag with the name Elden, and a piece of cloth embroidered with 3 circles and a paw print. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Dennis was the first to speak. This was a resting place, but not a burial, more like a vault, a memory chest. Caleb climbed down and sat beside me, hands folded in his lap. He was the first, and now he'll be the last. "What do you mean?" He passed the bond on, piece by piece, until only the house was left to remember. Now the house remembers. Now Thian remembers. And the rest is up to us. Back at the house, we laid out the contents of the box on the kitchen table. Thian sniffed each item, lingering the longest over the collar tag. His eyes closed, and for a moment I thought he might whimper. But he didn't. He stood still, his body calm. The cloth we found with the 3 circles wasn't just a symbol. It was a map. With Evelyn's help, we identified the locations: the garden, the fireplace, the well. But there was a 4th mark, one that hadn't appeared yet. It was drawn in faint ink near the northwest corner of the property. That evening, we made our way to the spot. It took almost an hour, hacking through brush and moving branches. But finally we reached a patch of ground covered in stones. One stone had the same paw print symbol as the discs. Another was engraved with the name Mira. Caleb ran his fingers across it. She was the second. She carried it after Elden, and then the chain broke. That's why it took so long. Dennis turned to me. "What exactly is it we're a part of now?" I didn't have a complete answer, but I knew this wasn't about hauntings or fear anymore. It was about legacy. Memory. Duty passed down through fur and blood and silence. Back home, we gathered the discs one final time, arranging them into a new pattern. 2 rows, intersecting in the middle, like a cross. Caleb stood in the center. Thian lay beside him. The air grew still again. The lights dimmed. And then, without warning, the house filled with warmth. Not heat, but the sensation of arms wrapping around you. A presence, old and kind and watchful, The symbols on the discs flickered. The names whispered once more, and a final voice, older than the others, spoke a word none of us knew, but all of us understood. Then the whispering stopped. The house didn't. It breathed. And the story continued. The night after we returned from the stone patch, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, arms folded behind my head, staring at the ceiling. The old wood beams had always creaked and groaned with the wind, but tonight they were silent, as if even the bones of the house were holding their breath. I could feel Thyan's presence just outside my door. He'd taken to lying in the hallway now, between all the rooms. I never told him to, he just chose that spot. Like he was guarding more than just me, guarding the memory of the place. At 2:33 a.m., I heard a sound I hadn't heard in over a year. The doorbell. It rang once. Just once. Not a frantic buzz, not a glitchy double press. Just one soft chime that echoed through the house like a note in a cathedral. I sat up fast. So did Thyan. I heard him stand and pad toward the front door. When I got there, Caleb was already downstairs, standing in the foyer, one hand gripping the banister. "You heard it too?" I asked. He nodded. I was already awake. I opened the door slowly. No one was there. But on the porch sat a bundle wrapped in burlap and tied with twine. I brought it in, heart pounding. Thyan sniffed it thoroughly, then sat. Inside the burlap was a wooden frame, square and about the size of a dinner plate. In the center, under a glass panel, was an old photograph. It showed a dog sitting in front of a fireplace that looked exactly like mine. Standing beside it were 3 men, all wearing early 1900s suits and hats. On the back of the frame was written, "Harrow House, 1912. Dennis arrived first thing in the morning. I didn't even call him. He said he just felt like he needed to be there. Evelyn came a few hours later with more pages from her ongoing research. Everyone sat around the table like we had the night we found the discs, staring at the photograph. "That's him," Caleb said, pointing at the dog. "That's Thyan, or what he was before." Evelyn looked at the men in the picture. "This one here is Elden. That's confirmed from the town records, and this must be Jonathan. The third man, I don't know." We stared at the image until the light changed in the room. That's when we noticed the carving on the frame's edge. 3 circles, a paw, and below that, a word none of us recognized. "Sovereign." Dennis pulled out his phone. "It's not English, not Latin, not any language I can find." "It's not a word," Caleb said. "It's a title. It means the one who listens." "To what?" "To everything." Later that afternoon, we brought the frame to the room above the fireplace. We placed it on the mantel. The moment it touched the wood, a deep hum vibrated through the floor. It wasn't loud, it was felt more than heard. The lights dimmed slightly, then returned to normal. Thyan lay down at the base of the stairs, eyes fixed on the frame. Nothing else happened that night, until I closed my eyes. I dreamed again. But this time I wasn't watching from the outside. I was in it. I stood in the center of the clearing where the well had been, surrounded by thick mist. Across from me stood Elden, the man from the photo. He didn't speak. He just looked at me and raised his hand. Then he turned and pointed at Thyan, who was sitting quietly beside me in the dream. Elden placed a disc in Thyan's mouth, nodded once, and disappeared into the fog. When I woke up, there was a new disc in the fireplace. It hadn't been there the night before. It was smaller than the others, with the sovereign word carved into it. I didn't even question it. I just called everyone back. "This house is more than a house," I said once we were all seated. "It's a vessel. It holds things, names, duties, history. And maybe we're not just the ones living here. Maybe we're the ones chosen to keep it. Caleb stood and pointed to the hallway. There's more coming. I can feel it. Evelyn opened her notebook. I've found fragments from journals mentioning a cycle of 7. 7 dogs. 7 keepers. 7 names. If Thyan is the 7th. Dennis finished her thought. Then it ends with him. But it doesn't die with him, I said. It continues another way. That evening, Caleb and Thyan led us back to the woods. They didn't say a word. Caleb's eyes were fixed forward, and Thyan walked like he was on a mission. We passed the well again, but didn't stop. Deeper into the woods, the trees began to thin. The ground rose slightly, and we came to a small hill with a ring of stones at the top. Each stone had a paw print carved into it. Some were worn nearly smooth. Others looked like they'd been etched just yesterday. This is the circle, Caleb said, where each keeper is remembered. We stood in silence. Then Thyan walked to the center and lay down. And for the first time, I felt something leave him. Not in a frightening way. More like a story he'd been carrying was now resting somewhere deeper, somewhere permanent. When we returned to the house, everything felt brighter, warmer, as though a storm had passed and we were standing in the sun. I found another letter tucked beneath my pillow that night. No name, just a single line. The keeper remains until remembered. I folded the letter and placed it on my nightstand. Then I sat beside Thyan, who was already asleep. He twitched in his dreams, probably running through fields he remembered, fields I hadn't seen yet, and all I could think was, what happens when the house remembers everything? The morning after I found the letter beneath my pillow, I woke to find the entire house humming. It wasn't a noise so much as a feeling, a vibration under the floorboards, inside the walls, pulsing gently like the heartbeat of something alive. Thyan was already standing at the foot of my bed, ears up, tail wagging once. He didn't seem alarmed. If anything, he looked expectant. I dressed quickly and found Caleb waiting downstairs. He was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, the old sovereign disc resting on the floor before him. He didn't look up when I entered. "They're coming," he said simply. "Who?" "Not people, not ghosts, not really even spirits. The rest of the memory." Thyan walked to the disc, nudged it once, and lay beside it like he had with all the others. But this time, instead of stillness, he let out a single, low whine. The sound was soft, but it hit me like a bell tolling through the house. Dennis and Evelyn arrived less than an hour later, unprompted as always, as if the house itself called them. We sat around the table again, just like in the early days. But things were different now. We weren't investigating anymore. We were participating, contributing, belonging. Evelyn had brought a new map. This one was hand-drawn, copied from a forgotten ledger at the town archive. It showed the full Harrow property from over a century ago, far beyond the fences that now defined my backyard. There were 7 points marked on the drawing, connected by faint lines. 7 sites, she said. 7 nodes. I think each one holds a part of what was lost. "Do we know what we're supposed to do with them?" Dennis asked. "We don't do anything," Caleb replied. "They'll come to us. Thyan will show us when it's time." I looked at the dog, now standing again, pacing slowly from window to window. He paused at the back door and stared out at the yard. "I think it's starting," I said. That afternoon, we returned to the clearing beyond the well. Caleb walked ahead, just like before, Thian never leaving his side. The clearing was different now, more open, more defined. The grass had flattened in a perfect circle, as if dozens of feet had passed through while we slept. In the center of the circle stood a figure. It wasn't a person. Not exactly. More like the memory of one. It shimmered faintly in the afternoon light, translucent and gray-blue, its outline barely holding together. Thian stepped forward and barked once. The figure knelt. And then, just as quickly, it vanished. In its place, left on the ground, was a stone disc. Unlike the others, this one was rough, unfinished, the symbol barely carved in. "First memory," Evelyn whispered. "The first return." We collected it and brought it back to the house. When we placed it next to the others, the whole set shifted, rotated slightly, aligning as if on an invisible axis. The sovereign disk at the center began to glow faintly. That night, the dreams came again. This time it wasn't Elden or a foggy forest. It was the house itself. I saw it being built, stone by stone, beam by beam. I saw hands, so many hands, laying the foundation, dogs running between them, laughter, singing. And then the sudden hush as the first disc was buried beneath the hearth. I woke up with tears on my face. I wasn't sad. It was like I'd finally remembered a childhood I'd never had. Caleb was already awake. He handed me another note that had appeared during the night, tucked beneath the sovereign disk. "Each return completes the circle. Only then may the keeper rest." By now, we all knew what that meant. Thian was guiding us through the reawakening of something sacred. And we were part of it now. Witnesses, yes, but also stewards. The next few days passed in a rhythm. The house would hum. Thian would lead. A figure would appear, sometimes human-shaped, sometimes canine, once a pair of children holding hands. Each one left a fragment, a token, a piece of something bigger. We stored each item in the sunroom, where the light always felt warmer. 7 days brought 7 fragments. When we placed the last one down, a small iron key wrapped in cloth, the sovereign disk pulsed once, and then stilled. The house grew silent. We waited. Hours. Then overnight. Stillness. I began to worry that we'd missed something, that there was another step, another piece. But in the early morning, the doorbell rang again. This time, when I opened the door, there was a woman standing on the porch. White hair, tall frame, eyes like frost. "Is this where the keeper lives?" she asked. My throat tightened. Yes. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited. She moved like she knew every board, every nail. "I was born here," she said. 1939. My mother told me the house chose us, but we didn't stay long. My father didn't believe." She knelt before Thian. He stepped forward and gently licked her hand. "I dreamed of him every year since. Didn't know why. Didn't understand until now." She opened her coat and pulled out a leather pouch. Inside were papers, photographs, and a single worn disc with a faint paw print on it. "I think this belongs here," she said. The moment it touched the table, the entire house exhaled. That's the only way I can describe it. It exhaled. Light streamed through every window. The hum returned, louder, warmer. The floor trembled, but not with fear, with fulfillment. And on the far wall of the living room, a new carving appeared. 3 circles, 1 paw, 1 name. Nathaniel, carved as though it had always been there. He lay down beside it, eyes soft. Caleb placed his hand on the carving and whispered something I didn't hear. We didn't speak for a long time after that, just sat in the warm light, listening to the quiet thrum of a house that finally remembered itself. But deep down, I knew we were still in the middle. There was more to come. The keeper wasn't done yet. Not while anyone still needed remembering. The house had changed again. It wasn't louder or brighter or more active. It was deeper, and that's the best word I can use. It felt like we were walking through layers of something old and enormous that had finally stopped pretending to be just walls and windows. The air had weight now. The corners of every room held echoes. And the stairs creaked like they remembered things. After the white-haired woman left, she said her name was Eleanor and that she would be back. We found that every disc we'd collected had shifted slightly in place. They now formed a larger circle around the sovereign disc, which itself had developed a faint shimmer beneath the carvings, as though something inside it had awakened. Caleb sat on the floor beside them, hands folded, silent. He'd become more reserved these past few days, not withdrawn, but contemplative, like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. Dennis arrived just after sunrise, holding 2 thermoses of coffee and a look that said he hadn't slept. "I keep dreaming about fire," he said. "Not destruction. More like forging, creation, something in the flame." Evelyn followed not long after, bringing with her a dusty wooden chest she'd recovered from a storage room in the town's historical records office. It wasn't logged in their archives. No number, no label. Just sitting there, waiting. Inside the chest were documents older than any we'd seen, handwritten letters, pressed flowers between parchment, and sketches of buildings that never existed. Or maybe had once, but no longer did. One page held a blueprint eerily similar to my house, but it had more rooms. Hidden ones. Extensions that jutted underground. "We need to find them," Caleb said without hesitation. We spent the rest of the day tapping walls, checking baseboards, crawling under furniture. It wasn't until late afternoon that Nathaniel found something. He pawed at the far end of the basement, just behind the water heater, a patch of paneling that sounded hollow. Dennis and I removed the panel together, revealing a narrow staircase made of stone. We descended slowly, our flashlights flickering against the damp walls. The air was thick with the scent of earth and old wood. At the bottom was a door. Plain. Wooden. No knob. Just a small indentation in the shape of a paw print. Nathaniel stepped forward and pressed his paw to the mark. The door creaked open. Inside was a chamber barely the size of a bedroom. At its center stood a pedestal, and on it, a book. Bound in weathered leather, its pages were yellowed and thick. Around the pedestal were carvings, dozens of names, symbols, dates, and in the center of the floor, the sovereign mark. Evelyn ran her fingers across the pages. "It's a registry," she whispered. "Of keepers, of events, of arrivals and departures." I leaned over her shoulder, scanning the pages. The entries weren't written in paragraphs. They were more like fragments. Mira held the veil. Light broke twice. Rain followed. Jonas saw the path. Dog slept beneath sun. Fire circled. Nathaniel, waiting, listening, memory buried in silence. The last page was blank. Caleb stepped forward and placed the sovereign disk in the center of the room. It pulsed once, then dissolved into ash. No one spoke. We didn't have to. We spent the night transcribing the registry, afraid that even with the house remembering, paper might still forget. At some point, Nathaniel curled up by the fireplace, Caleb beside him, the boy's hand resting gently on his back. The next morning, the tree line behind the house had moved. I know how strange that sounds, but it's true. The edge of the woods had shifted closer, by a good 10 feet. We double-checked photos, compared shadows, measured. Maybe the house is expanding, Dennis said. Or maybe it's just revealing what was always here, Evelyn countered. Later that day, a man arrived. He looked to be in his 60s, sun-weathered skin, heavy boots, and a quiet presence that filled the room. He introduced himself as Nathaniel. I was told to come, he said. My father used to tell me stories about this place. Said it was a well of something older than God. He carried nothing with him but a single, blackened key. I found this in a jar in his workbench. Been carrying it for years. Figured I'd know where it went eventually. We showed him the hidden chamber. He placed the key into a groove near the base of the pedestal we hadn't even noticed. The pedestal rotated once, revealing a lower compartment. Inside was a single collar, wider than Nathaniel's, sturdier. Metal worked into the shape of the triune mark, and engraved beneath it, "The first keeper returns." We didn't understand it, not yet. That night, the wind returned, stronger than before. It tore through the trees like a song too loud to be ignored, and from the corners of the house, new carvings began to appear, along the baseboards, around the doorframes, under the windowsills. More names, more signs. The house was no longer remembering. It was speaking, and we were finally learning how to listen. I stood outside around midnight, looking up at the roofline. The stars were clearer than I'd ever seen. The trees stood still now, silent and reverent. Nathaniel came to my side, his breath fogging gently in the cool night. "We're not done," I said aloud, mostly to myself. He licked my hand once and sat. The next day, Caleb spoke the name again, Sovereign, and the room brightened. The light didn't come from the sun. It came from the past. And the house, ever patient, waited for us to open the next page of its long, long story. The day began with silence, but not the kind that made you uneasy. It was the kind of stillness that felt earned, like the pause between movements in a symphony. The morning light filtered in through the windows in long, honey-colored beams. Dust floated gently in the air, catching the glow like fireflies frozen mid-flight. Nathaniel was already awake, standing at the base of the stairs, eyes pointed toward the western wall, the only one left untouched by carvings. Caleb stood beside him, barefoot, his pajama pants brushing the tops of his feet. He didn't look tired, despite the hour. He looked ready. "I think today's the day," he said. I asked what he meant, and he just turned his head slightly. "It's going to ask something from us." Dennis and Evelyn arrived before we even called. Nathaniel followed, bringing a thick roll of canvas tucked under his arm. Inside were ink rubbings he'd made of the carvings that appeared throughout the house. Some of the symbols had changed overnight. Where there had been paw prints and circles before, there were now eyes, keys, and bridges. One corner of the canvas had a new design altogether, a spiral that folded in on itself with no discernible end. "It's trying to open something," Evelyn said, her voice low. I felt it, too, the anticipation. the weight of being on the verge. By midday, the western wall had begun to shift. Not with tools or noise, but with texture. The smooth plaster rippled like water caught in wind. When I reached out to touch it, the wall was warm. Thyan sat across from it, unmoving. It wasn't until sundown that the first sound came. A low hum, like a note held by unseen lips. The lights dimmed, and the hum deepened. Caleb stepped forward and placed his hand on the wall. "It wants a story," he said, looking back at us. "One that hasn't been told yet." Evelyn took a breath. "Do you mean a new story? Or the missing one?" "Yes," Caleb replied. So we began. Not like a performance, not like a reading, but like remembering something we'd all been part of, even if we didn't know how. We spoke of the discs, of the dreams, of Mira and Jonas, and the first fire, and the hidden book, of Sovereign, and the silence, and the return of names long forgotten. Each word brightened the room. Each sentence added depth to the glow. By the time we reached the end of what we knew, the wall had changed. It now bore a mural, painted in soft, iridescent layers. It depicted 7 dogs, each resting at the feet of 7 people, and above them, a canopy of stars twisted into the shape of the triune mark. Thyan walked to the center of the room and looked up at it. Then he barked. Once. The mural shimmered. And then the door opened. Not a door we could see at first, but a square of light appeared in the western wall, slowly unfolding like paper. Behind it was a chamber, circular and domed, like the inside of a cathedral. Symbols glowed along its walls, floating just above the surface, and in the center was a pedestal carved from white stone. The pedestal held nothing. Caleb stepped inside first. The rest of us followed. The moment our feet crossed the threshold, the chamber vibrated, and a voice, not a person's voice, but the house itself, spoke a single word. Remember. We didn't respond. We didn't need to. Thyan stepped onto the pedestal. Nothing dramatic happened. No thunder. No burst of light. But in that moment, we all felt it. The binding. The connection between all the pieces, the stories, the symbols, the names, the watchers and the walkers and the children and the keepers. Dennis knelt. Evelyn placed a hand to her chest. Nathaniel wiped his eyes. And Caleb said, "Now we write what comes next." We brought in journals, blank scrolls, old typewriters, and fresh ink. For days, the house became a place of recording. We wrote not just what had happened, but what had been sensed, dreamed, whispered. Every room echoed with the sound of memory becoming story. Eleanor returned on the 3rd day. She carried with her a thin strip of metal. It was a nameplate, worn and dulled with time. She handed it to me without a word. On it were 4 letters. Kai. "Another keeper?" I asked. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe just someone who listened long enough." We added her name to the wall, and when we did, the chamber brightened. By the end of the week, the carvings began to shift again, moving, realigning into constellations. Evelyn traced them and found they matched the night sky from different seasons. "It's marking time," she whispered. "Not just now, but always." That night, I sat outside with Diane, watching the stars. "What are we now?" I asked him. He didn't respond, but I felt it. The answer wasn't a word. It was a role, a promise. And the house, ancient and awake, waited patiently for us to keep going. Not to end anything, but to carry it forward. It rained the morning the final page was written. Not a storm, not a downpour, just a slow, steady fall that tapped gently on the windows like an old friend asking to be let in. The kind of rain that washed nothing away, but soaked everything in memory. The house had grown quieter in the last day, not because it had gone dormant again, but because it had nothing left to say. Not in whispers, not in echoes. It had told its story. We had listened. Nathaniel sat by the fireplace where this all began. The same spot where the bowl once refused to hold food, where I first felt the strange pulse in the air. He looked older now, not in body, but in presence. Wiser. Still. His eyes held something more than thought. They held resolution. Caleb was up early, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor with the last of the journals opened in front of him. The chamber with the white pedestal remained lit, but it had stopped humming. The glow no longer pulsed. It just was. That was enough. Dennis brewed coffee without a word. Evelyn packed up her rubbings and scrolls like a librarian returning her favorite books. Nathaniel stood by the west wall, running his fingers across the mural with the 7 dogs and 7 keepers beneath the canopy of stars. His hand lingered over the triune mark, and I stood in the hallway, staring at the door. The same door where it all started. 1 ring, 1 wrapped bundle, 1 faithful dog who refused to eat because something older than us needed to be remembered. The house didn't hum. It didn't shudder. It didn't change. It had finished changing. I stepped into the chamber one last time. The blank page we'd reserved for the final entry sat on the pedestal, untouched. There was no ash this time, no disk to dissolve, just the empty space waiting. I took a pen and wrote a single sentence. The house has remembered. When I closed the book, the light dimmed for a moment, then returned. Not brighter, not duller, just calm, present. Nathaniel walked in beside me, brushed his head against my leg, and lay down at the base of the pedestal. He stayed there for hours. That evening, as dusk settled over the property, a group of people approached the house. None of us had called them. They came like the rain, slowly, softly, as if drawn by something they didn't know how to name. Some were older, some younger, some had dogs with them, some didn't. All of them stepped onto the porch with quiet reverence. No questions, just presence. One by one, they entered the house. Some touched the carvings, some sat on the steps. Others walked through each room like pilgrims in a sacred place. They didn't ask what had happened. They knew something had. We welcomed them with silence and tea and stories shared in fragments. Evelyn led small groups to the mural. Nathaniel showed them the blueprint. Dennis guided them through the old registry. Caleb sat with the children and pointed to the ceiling, showing them constellations he claimed hadn't been in the sky until the house remembered them. The visitors left tokens, ribbons, notes, polished stones. They tucked them between the walls and floorboards, offered them to the corners of the house like prayers without form. And when they left, the house grew still again. Later that night, Nathaniel rose. He walked to the door on his own, stood there, looked back at me, then looked forward again. I opened the door. He stepped out into the rain. No hesitation, no sadness. He looked back once, eyes warm, and then he walked into the woods. I didn't follow. I stood at the threshold and watched until he disappeared into the mist. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe an hour, maybe more. The rain kept falling, and the house stayed quiet. When I turned back inside, Caleb was standing by the fire. "He's not gone," he said. "He's just where he needs to be now." I nodded, unable to find any words. He placed the collar, the one engraved with the triune mark, on the mantel. "It's not an ending," he said, "just the moment between breaths." I walked through the house that night one final time. Each room held a memory, a carving, a sign, a warmth that would never leave. And in every creak of the floor and every whisper of the wind through the eaves, I heard him. Not with ears, not with thought, but with the quiet certainty that something sacred had passed through here and would return when needed. So I went to bed, and in the stillness I dreamt of footsteps in the rain, moving forward, always forward. The keeper had remembered, and the house had kept its promise.